Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I am going to be reviewing and ranting about this book, Notorious Sorcerer, but I have a couple comments first. In the past, I have tried to honor both Black History Month and Women's History Month, and I'm usually better at Women's History Month than Black History Month because of the books that I read, there are more female authors than there are uh, black authors. So, that being said, this past year I read several books that were written by black authors that I should have held until this month. And two of them were some of my favorite reads throughout the last year. And that's The Black Cattail Assassins and The Lies of the Ajungo, which when I had finished reading them, I was so enthusiastic about getting to those rants that I just went ahead and did the rants in the middle of the furlough. So, I am looking through my shelves. I'm not certain that I have any books that I've read that are written by a black author. Now, there is one who I could read her book and hopefully finish it in time for Black History Month. If not, it would be for Women's History Month. And it's one that I purchased because a friend of a friend had been advertising it in a Discord server a few years back, and I went out of my way to support. A friend of a friend is going to be not a personal connection to an author, but I know a guy who knows a guy. Like the Kevin Bacon number. My Bacon number to that author is 2. And it was bound to happen eventually that if you have a wide enough group of friends, if you know enough people, eventually you're going to know someone who knows someone. That being said, it is a book I've had on my shelves since 2021. I think 2021. So it's been on my shelves it's been in my bookcases for a number of years, and I just haven't bothered to read it. And that's because the style, the genre of book that it is not the sort that I often read, or really ever read. I think maybe one or two books are kind of real world enough. One I can think of right now that's on a shelf behind me, I forget if it's on that bookcase or this one, is a book titled The Last Ranger, which is a very real world fiction kind of story. There's nothing fantasy about it. And the book I'm thinking about over there is the one with the book I'm talking about on the shelves. So I may get around to reading that and finishing it this month. And if I do, I'm going to make sure it's one of the videos I make this Black History Month. And if not, then it could go into Women's History Month, but I think it's better to do it sooner rather than later, especially because it's been on my TBR and I keep on putting it off because the Black Company is more my speed, or I try out what's it called, the Gray Bastards or something like that. And even if I didn't like some of those books along the way, there was always just something more my speed to get to. To get back to Notorious Sorcerer, this book is from 2022, first edition September 2022, simultaneously published in Great Britain by Orbit. Printing 1 2022, it says cover copyright by Hatchet Book Group Inc. Cover design by Lisa Marie Pompilio. Cover illustrations by Shutterstock. Author, photograph, so on and so forth. So this book is it's a strange one. It's not the sort that I would normally read for a couple reasons. The main thing is this book is a urban magic book, and I've read Dog Days before, but that's usually outside the scope of the kinds of books I read. So Notorious Sorcerer is an urban magic kind of story. It's a very small scope with a very far-reaching consequence. The different non-mundane planes are encroaching upon the mundane because the mundane has been without a power, a individual that maintains control of it. And the mundane has been without that for so long that it started to kind of fray around the edges and allow creatures from other planes, the demons, the Empyreans, and the its order. So it's supposed to be like chaos, order, and like holy, but like chaos is also unholy in this sense. And the holy is its own thing. So there are three powers from other planes, and the mundane is kind of the opposite of the more orderly one. So the demons are very chaotic, but the mundane is very there's angelic creatures on one plane and demonic creatures on another, and they are very diametrically opposed in opposition to the demons and the chaos. It's not in itself good per se, but in opposition to that. And that's because each of these are also assigned or kind of affiliated with classical elements. The mundane is very earthy. The three planes here, aside from the mundane, are properly called the abyss, the aether, and the imperial. And so the aether is more associated with wind, whereas the mundane is more associated with earth. And the abyss is more associated with, I believe, fire, and the imperial more affiliated with and associated with water. And so the main character is a alchemist, and he is not a classically trained alchemist. He is not one of these academic sorts that knows the different research and has access to the original alchemist's grand research into the whole thing. So he is going about it in a more self-taught manner. And so what he is doing, and this character's name is Sion Velo, and what he is doing is trying to kind of scrape a living, scrape by, and provide ingredients by kind of projecting himself with a tether, attaching himself to the mundane. He projects himself into another plane and steals materials that the more academically trained alchemists would need for their rituals. However, the law, the government of this city, is at odds with the alchemists, a very tenuously legal situation. The alchemists are allowed so long as they aren't ruining things. They are tolerated, but not quite legal. And so Sion, the story is kind of that story where the interactions between the government and the tolerated alchemists are coming to a boiling point and things start going wrong. And specifically, the governor's, I think the governess actually, her son, who she really loves, her son is missing and believed to be on a different plane. So alchemists kind of need to be doing their thing to be able to get her son back. But it's also the case that the Inquisitors are bearing down on the alchemists at the same time. And so it's a race to see, can the governess's son be rescued before the Inquisitors, who are kind of acting independently from the governess because she's moving behind back channels and closed doors to rescue her son. The Inquisitor is the one who is saying, look, I'm going through, I'm busting down doors, breaking into houses, I'm getting these alchemists. And as it turns out, the governess's son is trying to avoid responsibility while also he's in another plane where he has found a demon who not quite loves him because the demons aren't capable of love in a human sense, but he enjoys her presence enough, and that demon is bonded to him such that when he is finally rescued, and that's kind of a spoiler, but not so much for the plot because the plot then evolves into the deterioration of the planes. Um, when he's eventually rescued, he doesn't want to be pulled from that situation because of the responsibilities he's running from, but also because he is now connected, tethered in a way to this demon that he had been interacting with and formed a bond with. And so there's a tug and pull in different directions and in different ways from different planes. And all the while, it turns out that each of those three other planes, the Aether, the Imperial, the Abyss, have a representative on the mundane, that there are different characters who are secretly tied to those planes. And so Sion is not academically trained, but he is trying to do certain rituals that only he seems to be able to do successfully, while at the same time is having to find reagents and material components that he can perform alchemy by connecting different components to those planes. And so at one point, like, tears and like different senses are connected to different ones. So tears are needed for one. And there is a character who Sion is involved with. It is a queer story, and this is like a gay relationship. Sion simultaneously wants to be around the presence of this guy while also trying to help, because of a contract, fulfill this these desires that this guy has, one of which is to effectively leave the world. And to do that, he needs to be able to kind of detach himself from the mundane. And what that means is offering up senses, these different alchemical rituals that rob him of more and more of his connection to the mundane. So it's a really interesting story about Sion's growing into his understanding of what he can do, while also being an interesting story about that queer love, that relationship, while also being a story about the kind of way that alchemy involves kind of blurring lines and crossing borders. So, the academics barely being legal or tolerated enough, they have to kind of push the boundaries between what is legal and what is not, just so that they can bring this one person back. Sion is pushing across the boundaries, stepping over them to get into other planes. And so it's a lot of pushing against what walls exist between these different components of society and the world and magic itself. So I really liked it. It was a fun book. The actual meat of it was just over 400 pages. I think 410-ish, plus or minus whatever it started at. So it's not a small book, but it was a good read once I really got into it and understood what was going on in the story. It was hard to put it down. So, Notorious Sorcerer, I think it's got a second book, but it was a fun story. The cover art is what hooked me. Look at that cover art. Just beautiful. It reveals just enough to indicate, yeah, this is something cool, something I want to read, something mysterious. So, yeah, I purchased this from the Barnes and Noble in Las Cruces, New Mexico, actually a bit more than a year ago. And I bought it at the same time as Starless Crown. I am not as big a fan of A Starless Crown, but I am a fan of the Notorious Sorcerer. I think neither of those books have a and the before them. I think it's just Starless Crown and Notorious Sorcerer. But yeah, I preferred this book to the other one, and mostly because it wasn't quite. This one didn't reveal itself to be a Chosen One story until very late in the story. It seemed more like a guy that was failing upwards, and that's the kind of story I like. So by the time it got to this Chosen One aspect, I was already comfortable with it because all the rest of it felt like it was building towards something big. So yeah, I'd recommend this book if you can find it. I paid $18 for it, and it was worth it. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.